The church was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on your chest until you can hardly breathe. The scent of lilies hung in the air, mixing with the faint smoke of melted candles. I sat in the front row, my black gloves clenched tight in my lap, staring at the coffin I never thought I'd see. Then, she leaned toward me. My daughter. My own flesh and blood. Her lips barely moved, but her words cut sharper than any knife. He left everything to me, not you. The world spun. My throat tightened. My hands trembled so hard, I nearly dropped the program I was clutching. The tears I had held back for my husband suddenly turned into something darker. I thought grief was enough to break me. But betrayal cuts deeper than death. And in that moment, I didn't know it yet, but my life was about to be rewritten forever. My daughter's words still echoed in my mind as the service continued. The priest spoke, voices of the choir rose and fell, but I couldn't hear any of it. It was as if someone had pressed their hands against my ears, muffling the world. All I could hear was her whisper, "He left everything to me, not you." I sat frozen in that pew, my fingers clutching the edge of the seat so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wanted to turn to her, to ask her what she meant, to demand clarity right there, but I couldn't move. My body was heavy, rooted in grief, and now, in shock. But perhaps I should start before that moment. Before the betrayal. Before the funeral. Because to understand what that whisper did to me, you need to understand who I was before my world cracked open. I am 60 years old. A widow now. And yet, for most of my life, I wasn't someone people saw in that way. I was a wife, a mother, a caretaker. Those words were my identity, the labels I wore proudly. Once, a long time ago, I had dreams of my own. I was good at numbers, better than most. I had wanted to be an accountant, maybe even work for a firm. I liked the order of it, the way numbers always told the truth when people didn't. But life had other plans. When I married my husband, he was ambitious, driven, full of ideas. He told me, "We don't need 2 careers, love. You'll hold the family together, and I'll make sure you never worry about a thing." And I believed him. I gave up my degree. I put aside the interviews. I folded away those crisp papers into a drawer that was never opened again. Instead, I poured everything into building our home, raising our daughter, and keeping his world steady. I was the one behind the scenes, the quiet presence who made sure meals were hot, clothes were clean, and our little girl grew up knowing she was loved. I don't say this with regret, at least, not entirely. Because those years gave me moments I would never trade. First steps. Laughter at the dinner table. The sound of my daughter's small voice calling, "Mommy." But it also meant that when my husband's career took off, when his business grew, I was the one in the background. I was never the face of success. My work was invisible, unmeasured, unpaid. And now, at 60, with my husband gone, with my body aching from age, and my bank account in his name, I was suddenly realizing how fragile all of it really was. Sacrifice is a word people use so casually. She sacrificed for her family. But it's not a single act. It's death by 1,000 cuts. It's saying no to yourself so many times that you forget what your own yes sounds like. I sacrificed my career, yes. But I also sacrificed friendships when I couldn't afford the time. I sacrificed hobbies when the budget didn't stretch far enough. I sacrificed pieces of myself, over and over, so that my daughter could go to the school she deserved, so my husband could chase the dreams he believed in. And in those sacrifices, I told myself it was all worth it. Because isn't that what family is? Giving until it hurts, and believing the love will be returned? So, as I sat in that pew, hearing that whisper, "He left everything to me, not you," the sting wasn't just about money. It was about every choice I had made. Every yes I had given up. Every silent sacrifice that suddenly felt invisible. The days leading up to the funeral had already left me drained. Grief is not a gentle visitor, it doesn't knock before entering. It crashes into your chest like a storm. One moment you're breathing, the next you're gasping for air that doesn't come. I was already weak. My joints ached more than usual. My body carried the weight of sleepless nights, of staring at the empty side of the bed where he used to sleep. Financially, I was vulnerable too. Everything, our home, our accounts, our savings, had been tied to him. He managed it all. I had trusted him too. I had always trusted him. So now, with him gone, I was a woman holding a purse with no money, living in a house I wasn't even sure I legally owned. But more fragile than my body or my wallet was my heart. Because now, I realized, I might lose my daughter too. Let me tell you the truth, when you are 60, when your partner dies, your world shrinks in ways no one warns you about. Friends drift. Family calls less. Suddenly, the only relationships that matter are the ones that remain. For me, that was my daughter. She was my last anchor. My reason to keep getting out of bed in the mornings. My proof that all those years of sacrifice had meant something. But her whisper, it wasn't just about inheritance. It was about love. Or the absence of it. It was the sound of betrayal wrapped in silk. If she truly meant what she said, that my husband had left everything to her and nothing to me, then what did that mean about us? About her love for me? About the bond one thought was unbreakable? Emotionally, the stakes were unbearable, losing her affection, her respect, her closeness. Financially, the stakes were terrifying. I had no savings of my own, no pension, no safety net. Identity-wise, the stakes were shattering. If I wasn't a wife anymore, and if I wasn't even a mother in her eyes, then who was I? As I sat there, numb, the service moving forward without me, one thought kept circling in my mind like a vulture. Was I mourning my husband, or my life as I knew it? The answer, I feared, was both. Because his death was not just the end of a marriage. It was the end of the life I had built around him. And my daughter's whisper had turned that grief into something far darker. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to shout. I wanted to grab her hand and beg for answers. But I didn't. I stayed still, trapped in my body, drowning in questions that had no safe answers. As the final hymn played, I felt her eyes on me. Calm. Cold. Almost daring me to react. I lowered my gaze, my hands trembling. I couldn't look at her. Not then. But in that silence, one thing became painfully clear: my husband's death wasn't the only loss I was facing. And what I didn't know yet was that the funeral was only the beginning of a betrayal that would tear open secrets buried far deeper than I ever imagined. Tell me, what would you have done if your own child leaned in, on the day you buried your husband, and whispered that your whole life had just been erased? The moment the service ended, I expected family to gather around me. That's what happens, isn't it? People surround the widow, offering tissues, hugs, murmured words like, "He's in a better place," or "You're not alone." But instead, something different happened. People stood, but their eyes didn't meet mine. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all suddenly busy adjusting coats, picking up purses, patting children on the shoulders. It wasn't just distraction. It was avoidance. Their gazes slid right past me, as if I were a ghost in my own husband's farewell. I sat there, waiting for someone, anyone, to take my hand. But the distance in that room was thicker than the scent of the flowers, heavier than the silence that followed the choir. And that's when the first question clawed at me: had they known something I didn't? I turned, searching for my daughter. She had moved away from me, her black dress blending into the crowd. My eyes caught her near the back of the chapel, leaning close to a man in a dark suit. It took me a moment to recognize him, my husband's lawyer. They weren't just exchanging condolences. Their heads were close, their mouths moving quickly. Her hand touched his arm, not in affection, but in urgency. She glanced around once, making sure no one was watching. Then she bent even closer, whispering something I couldn't hear. The lawyer nodded, clutching the leather briefcase he carried. The same one my husband had always said held important papers. And suddenly, I realized I hadn't seen that briefcase once while my husband was alive. But now, at his funeral, it was here. Guarded. Locked. My stomach twisted. Why was she whispering to him? Why here, in the middle of our grief? The briefcase never left the lawyer's grip. Not for a second. Even when he sat, he kept it on his lap, one hand resting over the latch. It wasn't just professional habit. It was something else. Something heavier. I tried to focus on the condolences drifting around me, but my eyes kept being pulled back to that briefcase. The polished leather gleamed in the dim light, and each time he adjusted it, I felt a chill. Because I knew, deep down, that whatever was inside wasn't just paperwork. It was my future. My survival. My identity. Locked away, guarded from me. And in that moment, one thought rang in my head like a church bell: why am I the widow, yet the one kept in the dark? As I sat there, piecing together glances and whispers, another memory stabbed me. My daughter's phone calls. Or rather, the absence of them. Weeks before my husband passed, I noticed she'd grown distant. She used to call every day, sometimes just to ask about recipes, sometimes just to check if I'd taken my medicine. But then the calls slowed. First to every other day. Then once a week. Then silence. I told myself it was work, stress, her own life pulling her away. But now, as I watched her whispering with that lawyer, I realized something: her distance hadn't been random. Had she known this was coming? Had she been preparing for it while leaving me behind? At the reception afterward, the strangeness deepened. I moved from table to table, offering small smiles, trying to find comfort. But whispers floated ahead of me, silencing whenever I drew near. One cousin looked at me, eyes filled with pity, then quickly turned away. Another muttered, "It's complicated," when I asked how she was holding up. Complicated? What was complicated about mourning a man we had all loved? Unless there was something more beneath the surface. I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands trembling so much the liquid nearly spilled. Around me, people laughed nervously, spoke in hushed tones, exchanged glances I wasn't meant to see. It was like walking into a room where everyone already knew the secret, except me. I caught the lawyer's eyes once. Just once. It was fleeting, but unmistakable. A glance sharp enough to slice through me. Not sympathy. Not kindness. Something else. It was the kind of look someone gives when they know something that will break you. The kind of look that says, "I hold the truth, and you're not ready for it." He quickly looked away, adjusting his tie, whispering something again to my daughter. And there it was again, that briefcase. The weight of it was almost unbearable, even from across the room. I tried to steady myself, breathing deeply, reminding myself that grief can twist perception. That maybe I was just imagining things. That whispers and glances don't always mean betrayal. But then another thought stabbed me, cold and merciless: had this betrayal been planned long before his death? Because if my daughter had stopped calling, if relatives were avoiding me, if the lawyer was here with that briefcase like a shadow at my husband's side, then maybe this wasn't sudden at all. Maybe the funeral wasn't just a farewell. Maybe it was the unveiling of something much darker. Each moment added weight to the growing storm inside me. Why did my daughter stop visiting me in those final weeks? Why was she whispering to the lawyer like a co-conspirator? Why did relatives treat me like an outsider in my own family's grief? Why did that briefcase seem more important than the man we had buried? And above all, why did I feel, sitting there among my own flesh and blood, that I was the only one who didn't know the truth? As the reception wound down, I felt the walls closing in. My daughter approached me briefly, her expression calm, detached, as though we were strangers. She touched my shoulder, leaned in, and whispered again, not words of comfort, but a simple, cold sentence. "We'll talk later, Mom." No warmth. No grief. Just distance. And then she walked away with the lawyer, the briefcase still in his hand. I sat there, surrounded by family and friends, yet utterly alone. And one question echoed louder than all the hymns, louder than all the condolences. Had my life been rewritten before I even had a chance to grieve? I left the funeral with more questions than answers. My hand shook as I gripped the steering wheel, staring out at the cemetery shrinking in the rearview mirror. My husband was gone. My daughter was a stranger. My family had turned into shadows. And somewhere, in that briefcase, was the truth, a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But deep down, I already knew one thing: betrayal doesn't strike once. It spreads like cracks in glass, reaching places you least expect. And the funeral was only the first fracture. Tell me, if your own daughter whispered at your husband's funeral that everything you thought was yours now belonged to her, would you keep trusting, or would you start watching every shadow? The next morning, I dressed in the same black dress I'd worn at the funeral, too numb to change. My daughter had insisted I come to the lawyer's office. "We'll get everything settled quickly," she said. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. When I walked into that wood-paneled room, the smell of polished oak and stale coffee hit me. The lawyer sat at the head of a long table, the briefcase I'd seen at the funeral resting beside him. My daughter was already there, sitting confidently, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I expected sorrow. I expected grief. But what I saw in her eyes was something else. Anticipation. The relatives trickled in quietly, cousins, aunts, even neighbors who had no business being there. Their whispers filled the room, broken occasionally by muffled coughs or the creak of chairs. I sat stiffly, my palms sweating, my heart hammering. This wasn't just about property or money. This was about recognition. Respect. Proof that my years of sacrifice had meant something. I whispered to myself, surely, he remembered me. Surely, he honored the woman who stood by him for 4 decades. But then the lawyer cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. The lawyer unfolded the papers with deliberate slowness, adjusting his glasses. His voice was steady, detached, the way someone reads a grocery list. "To my beloved wife." My breath caught. The room leaned in. "I leave my love and gratitude for standing by me all these years." And then, nothing. No mention of the house. No mention of the savings. No mention of the business we built together. His next words landed like stones in my chest. "To my daughter, I leave the entirety of my estate, all properties, financial accounts, and business holdings." I froze. My ears rang. The words blurred, echoing over and over. The entirety of my estate. Everything. To her. Nothing to me. The room buzzed instantly. Chairs squeaked as people shifted, leaning closer to each other. Whispers rushed like wind through dry leaves. Maybe he didn't trust her with money. She was never good with finances, you know. Perhaps he thought the daughter would take better care. Each whisper pierced me, sharper than knives. My face burned, not just from humiliation, but from betrayal. I sat motionless, my body rigid, as if one wrong move would shatter me into pieces. I wanted to scream. To pound the table. To demand, after all I gave, is this what I am worth? Words on a page and nothing more? My daughter turned to me then. Her face was composed, even sympathetic. She reached out, touching my hand lightly. "Oh, Mom," she said softly, "I know this must be hard for you. But don't worry, I'll take care of everything." Her tone was tender, but her eyes betrayed her. They gleamed, not with sorrow, but with triumph. And as she leaned closer, I caught it, the tiniest twitch at the corner of her mouth. A smirk. She wasn't comforting me. She was savoring her victory. My mind raced, drowning in memories. I saw myself at 28, slipping the gold bangles off my wrists, heirlooms from my mother, and selling them to pay for my daughter's tuition. I saw myself working late nights sewing clothes for neighbors, just to cover textbooks and shoes. I saw myself giving up the scholarship I once had, the career I once dreamed of, because my husband said, "Stay home. Our daughter needs you more." Every sacrifice, every tear, every sleepless night, came flooding back. And for what? To be erased? To be dismissed as if my life had been nothing more than a placeholder for their gain? I stared at the table, my reflection faint in the polished wood. The words rose inside me, heavy, unstoppable. Was my life nothing more than service? Did I exist only to pour myself out so they could live fuller lives? Did my husband see me as nothing but a caretaker, someone to cook, clean, raise, and then be discarded once my role was complete? And my daughter, the child I loved more than life itself, how could she sit there and smirk while I sat stripped of everything? My lips trembled as I whispered to myself. Was my life nothing more than a placeholder for their gain? Relatives exchanged glances, some filled with pity, others with quiet judgment. A cousin muttered, "Well, at least she has her daughter." Another shrugged, "Maybe it's better this way. She's old now." Their voices swirled around me, but none of them reached out. None of them challenged the will. None of them defended me. And I realized, the betrayal wasn't just in the ink on the page. It was in the silence of everyone I had once trusted. The lawyer closed the briefcase with a click, the sound final, echoing in the heavy room. The inheritance had been decided. My place erased. As we stood to leave, my daughter slipped her arm through mine, her grip firm, almost possessive. She whispered again, her breath brushing my ear. "Don't worry, Mom. You'll always have a roof over your head, as long as you listen to me." It wasn't comfort. It was control. A leash disguised as kindness. And in that moment, I knew, this wasn't the end of the betrayal. It was only the beginning. As I stepped out into the cold air, the sun blinding against the polished cars parked outside, one thought pulsed through me like fire. If the man I loved most could erase me with the stroke of a pen, and the daughter I raised could gloat in my ruin, then what else had been hidden from me? And more importantly, was I ready to uncover the rest? When I left the lawyer's office, the world outside felt unreal. Cars passed, people hurried across the street, a child laughed as she skipped beside her mother. Life moved on, unaware that mine had just collapsed. I walked slowly, the sound of my heels on the pavement echoing louder than the voices in my head. The paper from the will still trembled in my hand, though I hadn't even read it fully. I didn't need to. The lawyer's voice replayed in my mind, word for word, a cruel lullaby. "To my daughter, I leave the entirety of my estate." I wanted to cry. But no tears came. Only memories. I saw her as a child again. My daughter, no taller than my waist, running through the kitchen with ribbons in her hair. I remembered how she used to climb into my lap, her sticky fingers pressing against my cheeks as she said, "Mommy, you're the best mommy in the world." There were nights she couldn't sleep unless I held her. Nights I sat awake until dawn, rocking her gently, singing lullabies even when my voice cracked with exhaustion. I remembered sewing her dresses from scraps of fabric when money was tight. I remembered slipping the last piece of chicken onto her plate while I told myself I wasn't hungry. And as those memories flooded me, one question stabbed deeper than any lawyer's words: how could the same child grow into the woman who smirked while I was erased? Then another memory came, the teenage years. She had slammed doors, shouted that I didn't understand her, rolled her eyes at my warnings. I remembered standing outside her room, listening to her music blasting, tears stinging my eyes because I wanted so badly to reach her but didn't know how. Her father was rarely home then. Business trips, meetings, long nights working. It was me who bore the brunt of her anger. Me who patched the holes in the walls when she threw something in frustration. Me who lay awake, waiting for her to come home safely. I thought it was just teenage rebellion. I told myself, she'll grow out of it. She just needs guidance. She just needs love. And now I wondered. Had I excused too much? Had I ignored signs of a growing coldness in her heart? I remembered pawning the necklace my mother gave me, the one I swore I'd pass down to my daughter someday. I sold it so she could go on her school trip, because she begged, because all her friends were going. I remembered eating bread and butter for a week while she had new shoes for her prom. I remembered working odd jobs, cleaning houses, babysitting, while my husband dismissed me, saying, "It's not real work, but at least you're keeping busy." Every sacrifice I made willingly. Because that's what mothers do. But sitting here, betrayed and erased, I asked myself, did she ever see me as more than a resource? Was I just the background character in her life, always giving, never truly valued? Then the memories of him came. My husband. The way he dismissed me with a wave of his hand when I asked about finances. You wouldn't understand, he'd say. The times he came home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. The nights he sat across from me at the table, eating in silence, while I longed for conversation, for laughter, for partnership. I told myself it was stress. Work. Business. I ignored the hollow ache growing inside me, the emptiness that only widened as years passed. And now, hearing the will, I realized, he had been secretive all along. He had been planning without me. He had written me out, not just of his estate, but of his trust, his legacy, his love. I pressed my palms to my face and whispered, had I ignored the signs all along? Had I been so desperate to keep the peace, to hold the family together, that I blinded myself to the cracks spreading beneath us? The missed phone calls. The cold glances. The way he clutched that briefcase as if it held more of his love than I ever did. It was easier to believe everything was fine. Easier to tell myself that love required endurance, sacrifice, patience. But now I wasn't sure if I had been noble, or foolish. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me looked older than I felt. Wrinkles etched around eyes that had cried too many times. Shoulders slumped from carrying burdens too heavy for too long. I touched the glass, whispering to my reflection. Who am I, if I'm not a wife worth remembering, or a mother worth honoring? The silence offered no answer. Only the faint hum of the house, empty and cold without him. And now I turn that question outward, to you, listening to my story. If your own child betrayed you at your most vulnerable moment, if the person you raised, fed, clothed, and loved more than yourself looked you in the eye and smirked while stripping you of everything, what would you do? Would you fight for what's yours? Would you walk away and try to rebuild alone? Or would you forgive, even when forgiveness feels impossible? I need to know, because I still don't have the answer. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? I lay in bed that night, the shadows long against the wall, sleep refusing to come. My daughter's words replayed in my ears, he left everything to me, not you. And my husband's silence echoed louder than the grave. I stared into the dark, realizing that grief was no longer my only burden. Now, I carried suspicion. Doubt. A gnawing fear that the betrayal I'd uncovered was only the beginning. And the question that haunted me most was this: what else had been kept from me, and how far would they go to keep me from finding out? It began quietly. Subtle, almost unnoticeable at first. One morning, I walked to the bank to withdraw some cash for groceries. My husband and I had shared that account for years. I signed the slip, handed it over, and waited for the teller to return. But instead of the usual polite smile, she returned with an apologetic frown. I'm sorry, ma'am. This account is frozen. Frozen. The word echoed through me, chilling my veins. I leaned against the counter, whispering, there must be some mistake. But the teller shook her head. You'll have to speak with your daughter. She's listed as the sole executor. In that moment, I realized, my access to my own life had been cut off. When I returned home, something felt different. The key I used to carry like a lifeline suddenly resisted in the lock. I jiggled it, pushed, pulled, but it wouldn't turn. I knocked. For the first time in 40 years, I knocked on the door of my own house. My daughter opened it, her face calm, her smile practiced. Oh, Mom, she said lightly, I had the locks changed. Don't worry, I'll give you a new key once we get everything organized. Organized. The word felt like a cage snapping shut. Inside, the home I had tended for decades now felt foreign. Furniture shifted. Pictures removed. My husband's chair gone. And then the final blow, my daughter gestured to the guest room. You'll be more comfortable in here for now. I've already moved your things. Her words were honeyed, but the truth was clear, I was no longer the mistress of this house. I was a guest. At night, I lay awake in that small room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. And I wondered, was she doing this alone? Or was this my husband's hand guiding her from the grave? He had always been bitter, distrustful, secretive about money. He used to say things like, "Women shouldn't meddle in business, or you'll only complicate things if you get involved." Had he poisoned her mind with the same beliefs? Had he whispered in her ear, long before his death, that I wasn't worthy of trust? The thought sank like a stone in my chest. Maybe my daughter wasn't just betraying me. Maybe she was becoming him. The gossip started soon after. A cousin called me late at night, her voice low. Everyone saying you weren't careful with money. That maybe he left everything to her because he knew she'd handle it better. Another whispered, "Well, you should be grateful. At least she's letting you stay in the house." Letting me. As if my presence in the home I built was now a charity. Everywhere I turned, I felt eyes watching, judging, dissecting my failures. The family I once leaned on now divided themselves into camps. Some with me, most with her. And the cruelest part? No one questioned her motives. Only mine. One evening, as I passed the upstairs hallway, I heard voices drifting from my daughter's room. Muffled, urgent. I froze, pressing myself against the wall. I recognized the voice instantly. The lawyer. Why was he here? At night? Behind closed doors with my daughter? I strained to hear, but their words were fragments. Transfer, account, control, she won't know. My breath caught in my throat. My hands shook so violently, I had to grip the railing to steady myself. Questions burned in my mind. Why did the lawyer visit her late at night? What secrets were they trading behind that door? Days later, I tried the front door with the new key she'd given me. But when I returned from the grocery store, arms heavy with bags, the key didn't turn. Again. I rang the bell, waiting. She opened the door slowly, her arms crossed. "Oh, Mom, I forgot to tell you, I had the locks changed again. For security." Security. Against whom? Me? Her tone was light, but her eyes were hard. I realized then, this wasn't oversight. This was deliberate. She was stripping away my independence piece by piece, until I was entirely dependent on her mercy. At night, I sat in the dark, my hands trembling, my heart aching with a grief deeper than death. This was my daughter. The child I carried for 9 months. The child I bled for. The child I sacrificed my youth for. And yet, here she was, changing locks, freezing accounts, whispering with lawyers, treating me not as a mother, but as an inconvenience. I whispered to myself, tears streaking my face, who was she becoming? One evening, as I passed the kitchen, I saw her sitting at the table, her laptop open, papers spread across the surface. She didn't notice me watching. On the screen, I caught a glimpse of my name. My bank. My pension. Numbers highlighted in red. She closed the laptop quickly when she saw me. "Don't worry, Mom," she said with that same practiced smile. "I'm just making sure everything is handled properly." But her voice didn't soothe me anymore. It chilled me. Because I knew, I was no longer a mother in her eyes. I was an obstacle. And obstacles get removed. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room, no, let's call it what it was, the prison cell she assigned me, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock in the hallway. Each sound reminded me that this was my house, a home I had scrubbed, decorated, repaired, and loved for decades. And yet now, I was treated like a squatter, tolerated only because she hadn't yet decided where to dispose of me. My chest tightened as I stared at the ceiling. My thoughts spun in circles. Why was she doing this? Why had she turned so cold? Was I nothing more than a pawn in her game for control? The questions grew heavier, pressing against my lungs until I couldn't breathe. And suddenly, I realized, I could no longer sit quietly. I had to face her. I had to hear the truth, even if it shattered me. The house was quiet when I finally slipped from the bed. The floor creaked under my bare feet as I padded down the hallway. A faint light spilled from the kitchen. There she was. My daughter. My flesh and blood. Sitting at the table with a cup of tea, her laptop open, papers neatly stacked beside her. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. Calm, collected, almost rehearsed. "Couldn't sleep, Mom?" she asked casually, as though nothing was wrong, as though she hadn't changed the locks on me, as though she hadn't frozen my accounts. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. My hands shook as I folded them on the table. I stared at her face, a face I had once kissed goodnight, wiped tears from, fed, clothed, and loved. My voice cracked, raw from holding in too much pain. "Why? Why are you doing this to me?" For a moment, silence. Only the ticking clock on the wall filled the air. Then she set her cup down and leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp and glinting. The mask slipped. "Because, Mom," she said slowly, coldly, "Dad trusted me. Not you." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I blinked, unable to process them. What do you mean?" Her lips curled, not into a smile but into something harder. "He always said you wasted money. That you never understood how to manage it. He left everything to me because he knew I could protect it. He didn't trust you. And honestly," she paused, her voice slicing like a knife. "Neither do I." My breath hitched. My throat burned. I reached for the edge of the table, gripping it as though it could hold me upright. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made. Selling my mother's emerald ring to pay her tuition. Working odd jobs when her father's business faltered. Sitting by her bedside through every fever, every heartbreak, every storm. And this was what I received in return. Not gratitude. Not love. But judgment. Condemnation. Betrayal. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "I gave up my life for this family," I whispered. My voice trembled, but it carried years of pain. "For you. For him. And now you tell me I was nothing more than a burden?" She tilted her head slightly, her expression unmoved. "You chose that life, Mom. You chose to give everything up. Don't put that on me." Her tone was dismissive, almost bored. She picked up her cup again, sipping as if our conversation was no more important than the weather. Something inside me cracked. Not like a plate dropped on the floor. No, it was deeper, more devastating, the soundless crack of a mother's heart splitting in two. I slammed my hands on the table, startling even myself. "You are my daughter," I cried, my voice echoing through the kitchen. "How can you sit there and speak to me like this? How can you erase me, after everything I've done for you?" Her eyes flickered with something, annoyance, not guilt. "You're being dramatic," she said flatly. "Dad made his choice. I'm just carrying it out." The calmness in her tone was more brutal than any scream. It was as if my love, my years of sacrifice, meant nothing. As if I were disposable. She leaned forward then, her voice low and deliberate, each word measured like poison dripping into a glass. "Dad left everything to me, not you. And maybe it's time you finally understood why." Her words didn't just wound me, they hollowed me out. I sat back in my chair, numb, the room spinning around me. The kitchen walls seemed to close in, the familiar house suddenly alien. I had lost my husband to death. But losing my daughter to greed? That was a grief far worse. I rose from the table, my legs weak, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and despair. I looked at her one last time, my child, my betrayer, and for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question I never thought possible. Had I ever truly known my own daughter? The silence of the kitchen answered back with nothing but emptiness. That night, after the confrontation in the kitchen, I didn't return to the guest room. I couldn't. The air in that house felt suffocating, poisoned. Instead, I sat in the living room, surrounded by the silence of a home that no longer belonged to me. My hands trembled as I ran them across the arms of the sofa I had chosen decades ago, back when we were still building a life. My chest was heavy, but my mind was restless. I couldn't let her words be the end. I needed to know how deep this betrayal ran. Something told me there were answers buried in the very walls of this house. I went to my late husband's study. It smelled faintly of old paper and pipe tobacco, a scent that clung even after his death. His desk sat neatly against the wall, drawers closed, surfaces polished. My daughter had left it untouched, perhaps waiting to comb through it herself. I pulled at the top drawer. Locked. For a moment, my pulse faltered. But then I remembered the small brass key he used to keep taped beneath the bookshelf. My fingers groped along the wood until they touched the edge of metal. I slid it into the drawer and turned. With a reluctant click, it opened. Inside were files, thick, yellowing folders with his handwriting scrawled across the tabs. My stomach tightened. The first folder I pulled was labeled Accounts, Confidential. I flipped it open, expecting tidy balance sheets, his usual meticulous records. Instead, what I found made my breath stop. Overdue notices. Bank demands. Letters from creditors. Line after line of numbers bled red ink across the pages. He had been drowning in debt for years. I pressed my palm to my forehead, the room spinning. All those times he dismissed my questions about money, all those arguments he brushed aside with, "Don't worry, I've got it handled." He hadn't had it handled at all. He had been failing. And he had hidden it. My hand shook as I whispered aloud, "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" But even as I said it, a darker thought crept in. Maybe he hadn't trusted me, because he never intended to. The second folder was slimmer, but its contents were sharper, deadlier. A life insurance policy. New. Dated only 5 years ago. I scanned the details. My name was nowhere on it. The sole beneficiary, my daughter. Not us together. Not the family as a whole. Just her. A sharp pain tore through my chest. He hadn't just left me out of the will. He had erased me from every safety net, every provision. This wasn't oversight. This was intentional. Calculated. I sat back in the chair, clutching the papers to my chest, the weight of them heavier than stone. And suddenly, pieces began to fall into place. The way my daughter's voice had echoed her father's that night in the kitchen. "Dad trusted me, not you." The way she had said it so easily, without hesitation. The realization hit me like ice water poured down my spine. This betrayal wasn't born the day he died. No, it had been planted long ago. My husband had poisoned her mind for years. Whisper by whisper, story by story, shaping her to believe that I was careless, foolish, undeserving. And she had believed him. I buried my face in my hands, rocking gently in the chair. Memories flooded me, nights of silence at the dinner table, his dismissive glances when I suggested ideas, his sharp tone when money was mentioned. I thought he was just proud. Stubborn. Old-fashioned. But now, I saw it for what it was. A slow, deliberate campaign to push me aside. And the cruelest part? He had succeeded. Even from the grave, he had turned my daughter into his weapon. Tears streaked my face, hot and unrelenting. I whispered to the empty room, was my whole life a lie? Did either of you ever see me, really see me? I nearly leapt out of the chair when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I shoved the papers back into the drawer, locking it quickly, clutching the key in my fist. My daughter appeared in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim hall light. Her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing in here, Mom?" she asked, her tone edged with suspicion. I forced a smile, though my heart pounded. "Just remembering him." Her gaze lingered on me, sharp, probing. For a moment, I feared she saw straight through me. Finally, she shrugged and turned away. "Don't stay up too late." The sound of her retreating footsteps was like a warning bell in my ears. As soon as she was gone, I pressed my forehead against the desk, clutching the key so tightly it dug into my palm. Now I knew the truth. This betrayal hadn't begun at the funeral. It had been years in the making, built on lies and manipulation. But one question haunted me, louder than the ticking clock, sharper than the papers burning in my memory. If he could twist her against me so completely, was there anything left of my daughter's love that I could still save? I couldn't hold it inside any longer. The papers in my hand, the debts, the policy, the proof that my husband had been grooming her against me for years, burned like fire. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, my throat raw from silent cries. And then I heard her voice, soft but clear, drifting from the dining room. She was on the phone. Yes, it's all mine now. Everything. She has nothing. Her words sliced through the air like a blade. I rose from the chair, the folder pressed to my chest. My legs trembled but carried me forward, each step echoing like a drumbeat of finality. This was it. No more silence. No more waiting. It was time. She sat at the table, papers spread out, the lawyer's number still glowing on her phone screen. When she saw me enter, she didn't flinch. She didn't hide. She simply raised her eyes, calm, detached, like a stranger waiting to finish a transaction. I set the folder down on the table with a sharp thud. Explain this, I demanded, my voice low but trembling. She glanced at the papers, then back at me, her lips curling into that same practiced smirk. There's nothing to explain. Dad made his choice. He left it all to me. My throat burned, but the words tore out anyway. Choice? Do you call this a choice? To erase me from everything? To poison you against your own mother? To leave me with nothing, not even your love? For a moment, my voice cracked, breaking into a sob. I carried you in my body. I gave up everything for you. Do you remember the winters I wore the same coat year after year so you could have new ones for school? Do you remember the nights I stayed up sewing your dresses because we couldn't afford store-bought? Do you remember the ring I sold so you could go to college? My words came like blows against her indifference. Tears spilled down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them. They needed to see the light. I gave you my life. And this is what you give me back? She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, her expression hard. You chose to give everything up, Mom. Don't put that guilt on me. Dad didn't trust you, and neither do I. You were never good with money. You were weak. Always emotional, always clinging. He wanted me to take care of things, and now I am. The calmness in her voice was worse than anger. It was dismissal. It was a verdict. I felt the room spin. I steadied myself against the chair, my breath ragged. Her words sank like stones into the hollow of my chest. I whispered, barely able to form the sentence. Had I raised a woman who could look into my broken eyes, and still turn away? The silence that followed was deafening. She didn't speak. She didn't reach for me. She didn't even blink. And in that moment, I understood, my daughter was gone. The child I had loved, sacrificed for, built my life around, she no longer existed. What sat before me was someone else. Someone my husband had crafted. Someone who had chosen wealth over blood. Something inside me broke open. I slammed my palm against the table, the paper scattering into the air like shattered glass. My voice rose, hoarse and raw, filling the room. Do you think money will hold you when you're sick? Do you think inheritance will love you when the world abandons you? Do you think these papers, these accounts, these lies, will keep you warm at night? I was the one who held you when you cried. I was the one who stood beside you when your friends turned away. I was the one who gave you my soul, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. And you sold me out for numbers on a page. The words echoed against the walls, and for the first time, I saw her flinch. Just slightly. But enough. Her jaw tightened. She stood slowly, gathering the scattered papers. This isn't about love, Mom. It's about survival. And I intend to survive. She gathered the folder under her arm and walked past me, her perfume lingering in the air like a ghost. Her footsteps faded down the hallway. The door to her room clicked shut. I stood in the dining room, surrounded by silence, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. Not just widowed. Not just abandoned. But erased. I sank into the chair, pressing my hands against my face, the tears hot and relentless. And I whispered into the empty room, my voice barely audible. I have lost my husband to death. And now I have lost my daughter to greed. The air was thick, suffocating. The house felt colder than ever. And a single, devastating question burned through my chest. What was left of me now? The house was no longer mine. I had walked its rooms as a ghost for weeks, feeling the air shift whenever my daughter passed me without a glance, hearing the quiet snickers of relatives who believed I deserved my fate. Now, after the confrontation, after the truth, there was only stillness. Not peace, stillness. The kind of silence that makes your chest ache. I sat in the living room, staring at the walls I had once decorated with family photographs. Frames now bare, shelves now empty. She had packed away my memories as though they were clutter, as though I had been nothing more than an inconvenience to the life she was building without me. And I thought, if I stay here, I will disappear. That thought struck like lightning. For so long, I had clung to the idea that home was where family lived, where love was rooted. But now, love had been replaced with betrayal, and family had turned into strangers. I could not heal in the place where my wounds were carved. So I stood. My legs trembled, not just from age, but from the weight of decision. I pulled out a suitcase. Not a large one, just enough to carry pieces of myself I refused to abandon. I packed slowly, deliberately. The quilt my mother had sewn. A wedding photograph, not because I honored him, but because it reminded me I had once been chosen, once been loved. Her baby shoes, scuffed and faded, proof that once she had needed me. Everything else, clothes, furniture, possessions, became meaningless in that moment. I zipped the suitcase shut and whispered into the silence. You will not erase me. The morning air was sharp, biting against my cheeks as I carried the suitcase out the door. The lock clicked behind me, final and cold. Each step down the porch felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself was trying to tether me. But I kept walking. And with every step, I felt the faintest thread of freedom tugging at my chest. The betrayal had broken me. But leaving was the first stitch of repair. I arrived at Margaret's door, my childhood friend, my confidant, the one person who had never asked me to prove my worth. When she opened the door, her eyes filled before I even spoke. She pulled me into her arms, and the dam I had been holding back for weeks burst. Tears I thought had dried long ago soaked her shoulder as I clung to her like a drowning woman finding shore. You don't need to explain, she whispered. Just stay. Her words were not dramatic. They were not rehearsed. They were simple. And in their simplicity, they healed me more than any apology from my daughter ever could. Margaret's house smelled of lavender and fresh bread. It was not a mansion. It was not gilded with inheritance. But it was warm. She sat me at her kitchen table, steam rising from a mug of tea she placed before me. Drink, she said softly. You've carried enough. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into my fingers. And for the first time in months, I felt warmth that did not burn with betrayal. I was safe. Not rich, not secure, but safe. That night, lying in the guest room, the quilt tucked around me, I stared at the ceiling. My mind wandered back to her childhood, her tiny hand gripping mine as we crossed the street, the way she clung to me when thunder rattled the windows, the smell of crayons as she proudly showed me her first drawing. Then, like shadows crossing sunlight, the memories darkened. Her teenage years, her sharp tongue, her rolling eyes, her slammed doors. Moments when she parroted his dismissive words, echoing his coldness. Had I ignored the signs? Had he been feeding her bitterness long before I noticed? Was I mourning my husband's death, or the death of the mother-daughter bond one thought was unbreakable? I thought about the sacrifices. The career I had left behind to raise her. The jewelry I had sold to pay her tuition. The years I had sat alone, holding the house together while he built his empire. And now, nothing. No gratitude. No recognition. Only whispers at a funeral, papers that erased me, and eyes that saw me as disposable. Pain seared my chest. But beneath it, something unexpected stirred, clarity. I realized that everything I had survived before, loneliness, coldness, sacrifice, had not destroyed me. They had only made me forget who I was before I gave everything away. I was not just a wife. I was not just a mother. I was a woman who had built a life from scraps before, and I could do it again. They could take the house. They could take the inheritance. But they could not take me. I sat up in bed, moonlight spilling across the quilt. And I said it aloud, steady and sure. They thought they erased me. But I was not erased. I am still here. The words rang in the quiet room, firm as a vow. Not whispered, not tentative, certain. I had been broken, yes. But broken things can be mended. And mended things are often stronger at the seams. The next morning, sunlight poured through Margaret's curtains. I sat at her kitchen table, tea warming my hands, and smiled faintly. Yes, I had lost my husband. Yes, I had lost my daughter. But I had not lost myself. I would grieve. I would ache. But I would not vanish. Because I was still here. Scarred, but unbroken. Bruised, but breathing. And in that breath, I found something stronger than inheritance, stronger than betrayal. I found me. I want to pause here, and truly ask you something from the heart. If you had been in my shoes, standing in black, surrounded by whispers of grief, trying to hold yourself together at your husband's funeral, and then your only daughter leaned in, so close you could feel her breath against your ear, and whispered that everything, the house, the savings, the legacy of a lifetime, had been given to her and not to you. What would you have done? Would you have stood tall and fought for what you had built with your own hands, for what you had sacrificed to hold together? Or would you have walked away, broken yet determined, choosing to rebuild from nothing rather than beg for scraps from someone who was once your child? I don't ask this lightly. Because I believe every woman watching this carries her own story, of loss, of betrayal, of sacrifice that went unseen, of love that was never returned in the way it should have been. So, I'm asking you, what would you have done in my place? And while you share that with me, tell me where in the world you're listening from. Every time I see a comment from a woman in California, or a grandmother in Florida, or a widow in Chicago, or someone across the ocean, it reminds me of something powerful. It reminds me that I am not telling these stories into a void. I am speaking to hearts. To women who know what it feels like to give until you are empty, only to discover that even your emptiness is not enough for those who were supposed to love you. When you write, "I'm listening from New York," or "I'm listening from Atlanta," or "I'm listening from Johannesburg," it creates a thread that ties us together across oceans and generations. We are not strangers. We are not alone. We are women carrying heavy stories, and when we share them, even in whispers, even in the quiet of a comment section, we remind each other that we are still standing. Stronger together than apart. So please, type it in. Tell me not just your thoughts, but where you are. Because your voice matters to me, your presence matters. And if this story touched you, even for a moment, even if it just stirred a memory of your own, please give this video a like. It may seem like such a small action, a little click, but to me it means more than you know. It tells me you're here with me. That you heard me. That you felt something alongside me. And if you know another woman who needs to hear this story, maybe a friend who has carried betrayal quietly, maybe a sister who feels invisible, maybe a neighbor who pretends she's fine when her eyes say otherwise, please, share it with her. Because sometimes, hearing someone else's story is the first step toward realizing you are not alone in your own. And don't forget to subscribe. Every day, I share stories like this one. Stories that are raw, that are real, that are sometimes painful, but always true. Stories of women who faced betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, yet still found the courage to rise again, to whisper to themselves in the dark, "I am not erased. I am still here." If you don't want to miss the next story, if you want to walk with me through these journeys of survival, strength, and hope, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because here's the truth. As painful as this story was, as heavy as it felt, trust me, there is more to share. And I promise you, you'll want to hear it. So stay with me. Because the story isn't over. Not yet.